أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فهو المهتد ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Once again, we were here yesterday and we talked about revivalism and Islam. Today, I want again to thank the Islamic Renaissance Front for inviting me, and together with the Islamic Books Trust, inviting me here to Kuala Lumpur. First, for sharing views and experiences, and it was an honor for me to be invited to pay tribute to Muhammad Asad, rahimahullah. For many reasons, I will come to this, but thank you for that, and really, I think it's an important acknowledgement of a legacy, and also, as it was said by Professor Hassan, I think it's quite important always to come back to what the people, or what the scholars, or what great characters in our history thought and provided us with, but also to put things into context and to try to understand what could be useful for us. So, in fact, by what you were just doing before me, it's really the right way to put it, because I think that the overall approach that you presented first through the message of the Quran and then through the worldview of Muhammad Asad, it's quite important. So let me follow, in fact, and just share with you some of the main ideas that I think are important for us, because at the end of the day, to pay tribute is to acknowledge the fact that he gave something, but also for us to be able to translate this for our own time, and in which way we are dealing with this thought, and why and how this contribution is important for us. When I was young, you know, I'm the youngest son in the family, and I met Muhammad Asad, and he was very close to my father for years, till the end, in fact. And when they started to republish his books, my father was at the forefront of this endeavor, saying, we need to do this. It's so important what he produced and what he thought that we need to do this. Because it was difficult at one point, it was difficult for Muhammad Asad to find a way to be heard by the Muslims in the Muslim majority countries, but also in the West. Even his translation of the Quran was not received by some Islamic authorities as something which is without discussion. It was criticized for many reasons, and some of the points that he was making. So this is something which is also important. At the beginning, they pointed out that some of this translation understanding were even non-Islamic, and you should know that in his life, coming from the Jewish tradition and providing Muslims with critical thinking, as it was said, he sometimes heard from Muslims. And I want you to remember this, because this is our weakness. This is something which is unacceptable among Muslims. That at one point when people were disagreeing with him, they said, and scholars and authorities, never forget that he was a Jew. No, don't laugh. Don't laugh. It's unacceptable. It's unacceptable when you disagree with someone to come back to, oh, be careful, dangerous. To remind someone of his past, to criticize his thoughts, this is not acceptable. No one can judge the heart of someone because he or she disagrees with the mind and the thoughts. Let us take this as something which is crucial for us. Because I can tell you something, that today in the Muslim majority countries, as well as Muslims living in the West, I'm just facing this attitude, this intellectual attitude that is unacceptable from Muslims, because they don't know how to deal with thoughts and they are not ready to critical thinking, that they are targeting the being of the people saying, oh, who are you? And I think that the starting point of this, we are very happy when we agree with someone, you know what, he was a Jew. But when we disagree, you know what, be careful, he was a Jew. Emotional attitudes that are unacceptable. And by the way, anti-Semitism in Islam is anti-Islamic. We don't have anything to do with anti-Semitism. We may be critical of the state, as we should be critical to any state in the world, even the Muslim majority countries' governments, but there is nothing called anti-Semitism which is accepted in Islam. Min Ahl al-Kitab, and when we have someone coming from there, we welcome him without criticizing Judaism as something which is, a Jew is bad because he is a Jew. We will never accept that. This European history is a shame, and we'll never accept that. And I think that it's really important for me, because coming from Europe and talking to you about this, he was a European. And as Murad Hoffman was saying, a gift to Islam coming from Europe. But it's also something which is quite important. He was very strong against the Zionist project, a very narrow-minded, political project. And this is why he came to Islam with this worldview. This was very important. It's his own journey to Islam. But by being critical towards the Zionist project, we should understand that in his understanding, his mindsets, something which has to do with the suffering of the Jews is something that he was respecting and that we respect as Muslims. This is part of us. We will never go from one. Instrumentalizing the extermination of the Jews is not acceptable. To acknowledge the suffering is Islamic. So this is something which for me it's quite important as a starting point of the principle, the way we deal with people when they come to us as friends, as fellow human beings, or as fellow Muslims. It's an attitude of the mind, it's an attitude of the heart, is honesty and humility. And I think on that it's quite important. Then, as it was said, his personal journey is also something which is quite important. It's a quest. He was looking for something. He was. And when he was rejected by his father because he converted to Islam, in fact, what he was saying is that something happened to me that came to me as a robber during the night and stayed in me. This was the answer to my quest, the oneness of God. So he was experiencing this. And it's also from the starting point something which is quite important. It's not because you are a Muslim that you get it all. The quest is always there. You have to deepen and deepen and deepen your understanding. This is what he was saying. I discovered Islam. Islam was in my heart, and then I have to think. I had to think and to think and to think. So Islam is light in your heart, thinking in your mind, ongoing thinking, ongoing critical thinking. And this is the way he was. He was the way by the central thing, which was quite important. I will come as a central word, which he was refusing on this, is never go towards something which has to do with intellectual laziness. But this was true for his own journey, and this we have to respect this as someone who was blessed by, for us as Muslims, as the light coming from God telling him, this is the truth, come in. And he went and said, this is something that I didn't decide. It was in me. And then he was also able, something which is quite important, when he was in a train and then he was very young. He became a Muslim, he was 26, but when he was very young and he saw signs that it's as if God was talking to him. The signs are the elements plus meanings. So he was looking for meanings. This quest is quite important for us. And then through his life and thoughts, it's also something which is quite important. He passed away, he was 92, and the last years were full of meditation and sadness. And once again, it comes back to what I experienced myself in my family. I will never remember that a life of struggle and a journey, at the end it's quite important to look at the last years. Because sadness, meditation, what we did, this is something that I experienced in my family with my own father. It was exactly the same. Giving all your life to a project, to God, and then you come back to God at the end and you judge your own life with people, with human beings. and you understand better why the Quran is ending with a very short surah reminding us of the people 5 times. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس. At the end, be cautious as human beings and come back to God. And, doubt yourself as well. So this is something which he was assessing, and his own son, Talal Asad, who is now in the States, were talking about this last year, saying there was something here which was he was reassessing all this journey, and for us it's also something which is assessing and trying to take from his thoughts things that are important for us. Just let me highlight a few points that are important for me in his own journey, and then something which is quite important. As someone who became a Muslim when he was young, 26, and then he went, I think it's quite important to understand where he was coming from. And as I said, it was said again, a Polish family, very committed Jewish family. With his family, they were rabbis, and everything was connected to this. And he was young, and this is something which is really important in his own understanding of Islam. He arrived, when he was 22, he went to the Middle East. He went to Jerusalem, to Palestine, and he started to meet with Arabs. And what we got very often is that someone said once, it is said that it was people referring to Muhammad Abdu. In fact, we don't know really who said this, the first, saying, that's good that I met Islam before meeting Muslims. Because if I were to meet Muslims before Islam, I would never have been a Muslim. And the other side is Muhammad Abdu saying something like this, but once again, we are not sure who said this. Say, when I arrived to Europe, I met Islam without Muslims, but when I came to the Muslim majority country, I met Muslims without Islam. So all this saying what? The discrepancy between what the Muslims are experiencing and the very message of Islam, that we are all repeating. We are very critical. The first critical people towards themselves about this are ourselves. So much so that very often we are, the victims of this. We don't see our community in a positive, constructive way because we are always repeating this. We are very far from our ideals, which is true. But at the end, having said that, what are you going to do? What Muhammad Asad was doing is something which is quite important. He didn't meet Islam before Muslims, but he went and he met very ordinary Muslims. And through the people, he started to try to understand why they were living this very simple life. So this is something which is important. He saw from the very beginning the discrepancies, but there was something deep down that he was attracted to in his journey. So from human beings to the message behind. And this is something which is quite important, which means, in fact, at the beginning he was a journalist. He was able to look at things. He was observing. He was pondering, which is the critical thinking, but also something coming from the heart. Because he said in the Road to Mecca, it was a story of love. It was a question of love. So I would say that this is quite important here, is that sometimes we are very quick to criticize the communities and the Muslims and saying, they are far from Islam. But sometimes in the ordinary, natural way of Muslims living as Muslims, there is the secret of Islam. This is why sometimes, as a European, I'm reminding my fellow Muslims, say, be careful. Your parents sometimes came with no knowledge of Islam, that the secret of Islam was in them. They gave you the seed, even though they didn't give you the thought. Something is there. And this is why he was very, very positive about this. It was an ambitious project for Muslims, because this is why Muslims were great, because of Islam, because Islam is great, as it was said. And I think that on this, it's quite important to look at this journey, and it helps us to be very positive, much more positive than we are. That sometimes you can touch the greatness of Islam by being very close to Muslims, if only you know how to look at them. If only you know the secret, and not only nurturing the sense of failure, because he was not naive. He was not. And in all what he, Islam at the crossroads, and even the the road to Mecca and even his tafsir al-Quran is something which shows that this is something which is quite important. He was coming from a closed world, very focused on something that afterward he called the tribal dimension of the Jewish tradition, saying this is a tribe, this is something which is very narrow-minded. This is why he was not feeling good on this, the relationship between one God and one community. And then he went and he met Muslims, ordinary Muslims, and then scholars, and then shuyukh, and even people who were leaders. And he felt that was something which was important, and this is exactly what you said, the universal dimension, the world view of Islam. There is something which is with no limits, something which is beyond that. So he met people, and in their ordinary life, he felt that there is something which was beyond that, that Islam was giving them something which is a sense of the ummah, but the ummah in something which is no limit to our commitment to human beings, because this is a universal message. It's to go from a community of faith to a community of the community of mankind to the oneness of God, the very essence of Tawheed. So this is something that he repeated, and saying three things about Islam that are important, or two main features. The first thing is what he said in the road to Mecca, is a very simple religion, a natural religion. There is something which is simple and natural in Islam. And exactly what you said about the way he was assessing the Eastern religion. Say, you know what, in Islam, you do not deny or neglect anything which is in you. You are not going to be close to peace by denying, but you are close to peace by using in the right way. So nothing is wrong per se. Your ego is not wrong. Your ego is wrong if there is egocentrism, if the ego is too much. But to start with the ego, because one day you are going to be alone. And when he was quoting, وَكُلُّهُمْ آتِيهِمْ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ فَرْضًا, one day you are going to be alone. So to know that you are responsible of your own self is central, but do not deny. So this is something which is quite important, the way you use. And between who you are and the way you have to use all the dimensions, there is reason. Reason, no faith without reason. This is the main message that we heard today. The second thing is, as it was important in all what he's saying, is that Islam is a message for the individual and for the community. It's the balanced approach. So it's a simple, balanced religion, and this is something that he experienced from the very beginning. Now, he wasn't naive, and as I said from the very beginning, he was looking at the Muslims and understanding that there was a problem. There was a problem between the gap of the message that he started to discover and the way the Muslims were living. This crisis of understanding, this crisis of the project, and some of the Muslims at the highest level, the elite that he met, were blindly imitating the West. And the ordinary Muslims blindly imitating the tradition. So he was between two imitations. And the start of everything is imitation is wrong. Imitation is colonization. You can be colonized by the tradition and you be colonized by the dominant civilization. All the project is free yourself. And the instrument of this freedom, emancipation, is thinking, critical thinking, the intellect, reason, as it was said. And this is why I agree with you, that very often, and he came to this at the end of this life, by the way, is anything which has to do with the mystical dimension. He was talking about love, but the way he was talking about this emancipation of the heart, it's not so much present in all this first attempt to summarize his views or to come, it was the mystical dimension, the spiritual dimensions. This was not the first aim. Afterward, which is, by the way, he met Muhammad Iqbal on the political dimension, but Muhammad Iqbal has all the other dimensions. And he didn't meet him on that. He met him, of course, but not with this in-depth that we are talking about when it comes to understanding Muhammad Iqbal's thought on this spiritual journey. And for us, it's also very important to look at this. So it's free yourself, it's from any kind of colonization. And then, of course, a very important part for him was the political project. Never forget, he was in a specific period of time. He was dealing with, the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. He was dealing with Arab countries under colonization and the starting point of the Zionist project. It was there. This was the starting point. He was seeing this. So it was really about, resisting the British colonization, everything. And on this, and this is maybe one point where I may disagree, but we can talk about this. I think that El-Afghani dealing with colonization and the British Empire was already having a world view, not Muhammad Abdu. Before, I think that it's very important. Even I think that during the last years of his life, Muhammad Abdu changed a bit his mind by saying, let us start in Egypt, let us have something which is freeing ourselves, which was not at all Al-Afghani's thoughts. It was really, it has to be transnational. There is no other way but to have it transnational. So I think that he's somewhere in between, but he's really, and I agree on this, from this tradition. The Salafi of the end of the 19th century, he was coming from there, and then this was mainly a political project saying we have to free ourselves from that dimension. So now this is something which is important for all of us. It's how do we deal with freedom, that we free ourselves, we understand the worldwide dimension of view and of Islam, the worldwide project, the principle, ethics, all this was part of him. But if we have to now try to deconstruct his thought, let me just highlight two dimensions. I don't have time. It's very complex. It's quite interesting. But there is something which is, and this is where the message of the Quran is quite important, in thinking Islam, is how do we deal with the Islamic message. And on this, he was really important. And on this is, he was following in the footsteps of this tradition that we find in Al-Afghani. But not only, by the way, it's not something where, we are speaking about contemporary Islamic, reformists. This is why we start with Al-Afghani is not coming from nowhere. It's coming from a long tradition of people saying, be careful. The legal tradition or the tradition of Islam is sometimes preventing us from coming back to the roots, the text, and understanding the very meaning of the text. This is, this reformist tradition is not something which starts, it was, the revivalism was very deep at that time and has a very important impact because of the political context, which was the end of the Ottoman Empire and also the nation states and colonization. This is why we have it in such a way in the power struggle with the West. But it's not something which is new in the Islamic tradition. But one thing which was quite important for him, he is following in the footsteps of this tradition, saying, let us come back to the text in order to free ourselves from, all the commentaries and everything which was done by our tradition, so coming from human beings. So this free ourselves from a legacy which is preventing us from touching, getting the essence of the message. So it was el-Tajdid, el-Mujaddidun, it was against Taqlid. All this is part of him. He was coming from, he understood this, and he met all the people, at that time. He also met the people coming from the reformist tradition. You were talking about Sayyid Qutb, but before, all the tradition of the Muslim Brotherhood and all this, he was in touch with all that. He knew all that at that time, and then Muhammad Iqbal as someone who was saying, on speaking about ijtihad. So it was really to come to the text as something which is freeing ourselves from a very narrow Arab understanding of a universal text. So this was here. And for us, it's really important. For you, it's important. As people living in Asia, it's quite important to understand that the text is much more important than what the human beings are saying about the text. If, of course, you are faithful to the substance of the text. And on this, look at the man. He got a very deep knowledge of the language to be able, with the Arabic language, to say to the Arabs, your culture is problematic sometimes in your understanding of the text. So to get the means to tackle the model. So it's quite important if we want to be serious, and he was very serious. His level of Arabic was, the translation was very good, very deep. So this is something which is important. How do you challenge, authority on the text written in Arabic by the Arabs and their culture, by being able to use the means and to challenge the interpretation? This is one thing. Second thing which is important, we haven't talked about, but that in the book, the message of Islam, he is talking about terminology. And it's something which is the starting point, even before interpreting some of the verses. You may agree or not. On some, I don't. I don't agree with some interpretation, but I think it's very interesting because he's shaking some, traditional understanding. And sometimes there are this dimension of faith and dimension that could be questionable. And this is something which we have to do, is just to read and to ask ourselves. But words, for example. When, for example, he comes to speak about Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu. The first translation that we had is, O you who believe. And look at the way he was putting it, O you who attain to faith. And in fact, he was coming with al-iman, close to al-aman, which is a state of peace, so you are reaching something. So it's coming by challenging the way we were traditionally translating words, and this is very important. And for me, he was the one, when I read the message of the Quran, who was sending me messages, be careful, the starting point of anything which is your own understanding and your own translation to non-Muslims is words, the terminology. And this is why, for example, today, after this long journey, I was very young and I continued, I carried on this. I'm not, for example, when it comes to a very simple word, Islam, I'm not translating Islam by submission, because submission in English doesn't mean Islam in Arabic. It's not the same. The dimension is not the same. So I don't have time to come to this, but I think that terminology, and this is the one, taqwa, God consciousness. Very important. It has nothing to do with fear, and no, it's not only this, it's something which is deeper. He changed, not only for the non-Muslims to understand, but for Muslims even to be careful not to come to very narrow understanding. So terminology matters, translations matters. So I think that here, this is something which is in his book, so important in the message of the Quran. Once again, some of the Muslim scholars didn't agree with some of the translation. That's fine. But at least you come and you compare. You have this critical thinking, which is part of this. So he was saying this to the Muslims: don't imitate the culture, come to the very essence of the message, and terminology matters, and vision, and the whole structure of the message. And at the same time, being able to say to the Muslims, but don't imitate the West. So no imitation, as I said, it was crucial on this. Taqlid was problematic, and the critical thinking. And in one text, what he is saying is to be able to come with the ethical message of Islam with the means of the West. And something which is quite important in what you said, and he repeated this: science has no culture, or is not the ownership of a specific, no, it's a human legacy. It's for all of us. Now what we can add to this is, instead of imitating the West in the model, in the paradigm, in anything which has to do with technology and progress, is to add ethics to the means. So to integrate this. So this was also a relationship that he wanted to the West, which was a critical take, and he was coming from there. He was facing, and he was understanding that there was a failure here, that the dialogue was so important. Having said this, it's quite clear that for him, Islam was an alternative in this relationship with an alternative project that was able to come and to contribute. So the worldview was not only we have a worldview, we have to contribute, we have to challenge the worldview of the West with a worldview with ethics coming from Islam. So it was not only about power, it was about ends. What are the ends? And this is why he's always connecting his project and his political project. And if you go, we don't have time, I'm very sorry, but if you go in all his involvement in Ibn Saud and Sanusiya with Pakistan, it's all about this, is let us have a political project based on ethics, based with a vision about justice, about equality. So he's saying, don't imitate the nation state that we have with the secular system, but if Islam means something in our project, is all about ethics and ends. And he was quite disappointed with what he saw afterward. And how not to be disappointed. But this is something which is important here in this. Let me end with another dimension, which is also following in what we heard before on the message of Islam, but also the worldview that he was trying he was understanding Islam as being a universal message and having this worldview and trying to translate this. When it came to the West, and he was involved, he was a Westerner, he was a European. And when I read the road to Mecca, there is something which is, at the beginning of the book, he's saying something which is quite interesting about the relationship between the West and Islam, as an Islamic civilization. He's coming from Austria, and he was very close to all the European culture, and he used a reference to psychoanalysis. He said, you know what? The relationship between Islam and the West is exactly the same as the West, because it's not new, the relationship. It's a very old relationship, and in the past there was a trauma in this relationship, and this trauma is deep down in the Western psyche. And now the West, when they deal with Islam, it's like psychoanalysis. This trauma is everywhere. It's deeply rooted in the Western conscience. I think now, when he was saying we are very close, this was during the 50s and the 40s, now we are there. And I can tell you something, as a Western Muslim, as a European Muslim, I feel the trauma everywhere, every day. That there is something which is very deep, which is not coming from now. It's not only you are with your presence as Western Muslim, perceived as the outsider insider. The outsider is within, the foreigner among us, the stranger being us. And this is something that he was saying. He was, and you know, I don't know if you have watched the movie, at one point in the movie, he said, they don't even realize that they are full of prejudices. It's so deeply rooted. And this is something which is very true, that it's deep. And by the way, in the Muslim mind and the Muslim psyche, we have also this trauma. The way we deal with the West, the dominant, and they are, and you know, this paranoia attitude that we may have. It doesn't mean that we don't have to challenge the dominant power, but we have to be very cautious the way we nurture this in our mind. And this is what he was saying. And in fact, in this relationship, he was saying that these prejudices, this perception has to do with not only minds and thoughts, it has to do with psychology. This is what he is saying. It has to do with psychology. And I think that we are discovering in our Western experience as Muslims now that it has to do with psychology. That you can learn the law, that you can learn the thoughts, you can come with a critical thinking. When you use the critical thinking, there's something in the psyche saying, oh, you use that means because you have an other agenda. So the psychology is that you may speak with your reason, it's not heard with reason. This is what psychoanalysts are saying. They are saying sometimes we speak with your mind and it's heard with something else, coming from somewhere. And you have to respect this, but you have to know it. And in Muhammad Asad's work, there's something which is deep on that. And this is why he was focusing on terminology, translation, understanding the mindset. You are not talking to people who are like you. They are coming from a specific history. Terminology matters, the history, because the words are having the substance of their own history. Be careful. Don't, if you come with people who are understanding secularism, are freeing your mind, and you say, Islam is about submission. Submission in English is submit without mind. In Islam, submission is with all your mind. In the name of your deep rational understanding of this relationship with God, come to God. This is why it's much more to enter in God's peace. And peace is to acknowledge His very existence with your mind, not without your mind. It's not to subtract, it's to add. But you have to know this, to whom you are talking, to get this sense that you are not going to be understood if you only use these terms the way you are using them. Because it makes sense for you, it doesn't make sense for the people who are listening to you. So translation, so this is something which was important. He was not also naive on the power relationship. He was talking about power. And I was recently in Melbourne. We had the World Parliament of Religion, and Dr. Chandra Muzaffar was with us, and he was focusing on this power. Don't forget the power relationship. It has to do with power. It's not only about love and hatred and prejudices. It has to do with domination and power.
And he is talking about this. He knows what it has to do with colonization, freeing yourself, and it has to do, so ethics with power, it's important, but not to be naive because you have ethics, not to talk about power. So this is sometimes the spiritual attitude of some of our brothers and sisters, say, let us speak about ethics, it's all fine. And we forget that we are also talking about power. For us in the West, it's quite clear. Some of the people are ready to share culture, they don't want to share power. This is why it's just, the world is so amazed that an African American is now the President of the United States of America. He took some of the power. So it's as if we are all together. And when it comes to the relationship with Islam, this is something which is important, that it has to do with this. And then it also has to do to what he was saying. Islam as a religion with a worldview has to contribute, and Muslims should contribute. And contributing for him was about ethics, what about values, what about the centrality of Tawheed. It's everywhere. So if there is one consistency in his whole message is Tawheed. As the beginning, I was attracted to Islam by Tawheed. And at the end, if there is a contribution for Muslims today, is in the name of Tawheed to contribute with ethics, to contribute in this dialogue with the West, is to go beyond the trauma, the historical trauma, which is so important in our relationship. We are very close, but if between you and you, there is a trauma, you're not going to be at peace with your own self. You know this. Between you and you, if there is a trauma, no peaceful reality, no salamat al-nafs. So if you are with Muslims and between you, Western Muslims and Western citizens, if there is a trauma between you, no peaceful future for you, and you have to solve the problem. This is something that he was saying through all this discussion about critical thinking, and as it was said and repeated here, critical thinking is crucial. And he was talking to all the Muslims by questioning. And once again, it's something that it's a methodology. We agree on the methodology, we may disagree on the findings, we may disagree, and I'm telling you, on some of the points, I may disagree. I think that there are things that he may went too far in some of the statements, but the point is that the methodology is here. And then the other dimension that we may also ask ourselves, never forget the last years, because if in the last years he's coming back to the spiritual dimension, it may be that when we are starting where he ended, don't neglect what he added at the end, which is critical thinking and deep spiritual commitment. And I would say that these are the lessons that I am drawing out of his life. Jazakumullah.